Welcome to Letters from Norway, offering an American perspective from Oslo, with your host, Nick Cameron.
Hello and welcome to Letters from Norway. I am here with my wife, and today we're hosting the Independence Day 4th of July special recording. It's dedicated to my life living in Norway and how it's given me a new appreciation for America. I wanted to reflect on this as well as tell a little bit of my own personal story, how I ended up here. But before starting, I would really like to thank our donors who wish to remain unnamed for helping make this podcast possible. You know, we are a very small podcast. We are still only in the hundreds of downloads range and only getting a few thousand page viewers per month on the blog. So I really find this to be a very amazing achievement for so early in the game. So the question everyone asks me all the time, especially here in Norway, is why Norway? Why did I come to Norway? And that's always in every party, every social situation, on the bus, at the supermarket. Everyone always asks me this question as soon as they find out I'm an American. You know, what am I doing here? It's a long story, so long that I am writing a book about it called The Middle-Aged Man's Guide to Divorcing in New York and Starting Over in Oslo. If you're a book publisher, this is a good one. You should call me and we should discuss a deal. I'm on page 278 or 86,000 words of my manuscript. I still have a long way to go. It's going to be a very proper novel. I'm already on the third revision and it's been great. I won't recite the whole novel to you, otherwise we'll be here for a couple weeks, reading 278 pages of my manuscript to y'all. So the short story is that, I was a bit stressed out with my job in New York and my personal situation, and I decided to look into changing my life. So I narrowed down to 4 countries that I would like to move to. It came down to Singapore, Qatar, Switzerland, and Norway. Right away, I ruled out Singapore because it's not a good place to go if you jaywalk, cross the street wrong, or smoke a lot of weed. Both of those things can get you in jail or killed over there. Qatar, it's not for me. I like bacon, beer, and girls in miniskirts too much. So that was crossed off the list. But it is an interesting place, so I've heard. It's got a vibrant expat scene, and it's fun, and it's got, people go out a lot, but not for me. Switzerland was actually my top choice, but when I looked into it, it takes like 12 years just to get a permanent resident visa. So during that 12 years, you are bound to work, at a job, and you're stuck, and you're very dependent on your employer until you can get that permanent resident visa. And I think it takes some extra years after that to apply for citizenship. And that's even harder, very hard. Probably the hardest one to get in the world. I heard even if your parents are born in Switzerland, you don't necessarily get the citizenship. That left Norway. I chose Norway because it, was very close to the U.S. The English language is here. And the immigration process is actually relatively straightforward. You can get a skilled job seeker visa, which is what I did. And then you can get a job. And then after you get permanent residency after 3 years. And it's possible to become a citizen in 7. As I said before, the English language, you can get by on it here quite well. I mean, it's everyone even wants to speak it with you. It makes it even hard to learn Norwegian as an American because everyone wants to use you as an English teacher. It fits me very well. I was born in Minnesota and I was raised in Midwestern American tradition. So the cultural adjustments weren't so bad as it is like for other immigrant groups. So I thought. I mean, there are still some very big fundamental differences, So I left my job. I used to work at BlackRock. It's a big Wall Street firm. And it was like around February 2013, right after the bonuses were paid out. I put in my 2 weeks notice, and I just took a leap of faith. I didn't have any job lined up in Norway. I didn't have much for contacts. I just decided to go there. But before I did go, I did prepare. I started learning Norwegian on YouTube. And I recommend the following teachers. There's a few interesting people on YouTube trying to teach foreigners Norwegian. There's this one guy in Kristiansand. His name is Galstream. I'll leave the links on the show notes. But he gets completely stoned And then he goes to the Norwegian alphabet trying to teach you the pronunciation. And it's totally hilarious. Just look on the show notes. I have links to his 2 training videos to learn the Norwegian alphabet, because it's very important to learn how to say each letter and the vowels and get the pronunciation right, or people have no clue what you're talking about. I think the most famous Norwegian teacher on YouTube is this girl named Karen, and she looks like a typical Norwegian girl. She's angelic, good-natured, always smiling, gives an aura of a naivety and, comes from nature. And she has an extensive set of videos, that you can watch after you've perfected the alphabet from the first guy. And I also posted her links on the show notes as well. I would love to interview them for the podcast one day and thank them for helping me get a head start on learning the language. I would have to say I speak pretty good Norwegian. I mean, I understand everything. I can watch the TV, go to the restaurants. I can manage even in a job situation. But I have a very strong American accent. But everyone tells me it's acceptable and the locals love it. It's like speaking Norwegian in Norway with an American accent is like speaking English with an Irish accent in America. Let's just say the chicks dig it. Okay, so moving on to the journey, how this transition went, leaving, a great job, on Wall Street and coming to Oslo. I'm taking this leap of faith, as I said. It was just, going into the unknown. So I left, Newark, New Jersey airport, EWR. I talked about it on my Trip to America podcast. And I took the direct SAS flight to Oslo. It goes every night around 7 or 8 p.m. It's a very regular flight that's been running for probably 50 years. The first day, you arrive the next morning in Norway quite early, around 7 or 8 in the morning. So I, took all my money with me in cash. I was very paranoid about banks at the time, so I had to go to customs and declare everything. But it was very routine. I already had the paperwork filled out, and the guy said, "You look like a nice guy. Go pass." No interrogation, no customs, no none of that. Just he let me pass. No inspections, and then I met the host family. I actually stayed with was a nanny when I started out here. So I met them and I got my room. They gave me a room and I got that in exchange for taking care of the kids and, helping out with the housework. And then I went straight to the police station to register myself as a skilled job seeker. You have to do this. I mean, you can come to Norway for 3 months as a tourist, but if you're looking for work, you have to let the police know, and then they actually give you an automatic 3-month visa extension, letting you stay up to 6 months without violating your travel visa. So after the police station, and that was pretty painless, she just took a copy of my passport and resume and college transcripts. They want to, see your college transcripts, a resume, and your passport. And they just take photocopies and put it into the computer, and then you're on your way. You don't get anything stamped or anything like this. I thought it was a little bit strange. And I asked a lot of questions like, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" But she said, "Just go and go to your classes." So I had my Norwegian classes later that afternoon. So I was in a suburb of Oslo called Sandvika. So I went to this someplace in Sandvika. I think I just had a burger or some fish or something. And I had a quick lunch, and then I went to my classes, which were coming up pretty quick as I had spent some time at the police station. And so I was in the intensive courses from I believe it's the Folk University. They have these Norwegian cram courses. They teach 4 hours a day and give you a lot of homework. So I had signed up for those courses, but luckily I had a little bit of a head start. So I wasn't wasting any time, and I also wanted to fight the jet lag. I remember that day. It was like, it was a very long day, because I didn't sleep much on the flight. And I think I even met some strange people on the flight. And that's, so, and then I had to, get my room, go to the police station, get something to eat. And now I'm in Norwegian classes, and now it's starting to hit me that I'm really tired, but you have to really sometimes keep focus. And then I had to get back home, and I got my duties as a nanny, that there would be some days I take these kids to the daycare center. Some days I would do some babysitting. Generally I was, doing some housework. And, this is all fun. This is like a very typical thing that people do in Norway, except that I was a middle-aged man. I was 43 years old, middle-aged man of Indian origin, American guy, babysitting kids in exchange for rent. and food, but it worked. It's you got to do what you got to do. And it was kind of fun. These kids were quite interesting. You start learning about how kids develop their characters and personalities at an early age. So it kind of gets you reconnected to being human, after working in an office all those years. Over time, I get a nice regiment, a nice routine going. In the very early mornings, I would go to the gym, just so I wouldn't interfere with the family when they're getting ready for work and all of this kind of things. And it's a gym called Evo Fitness. It's one of these self-serve gyms where you get a little key fob and you let yourself in. One thing that's interesting about going to the gym very early in the morning between 5 and 7 a.m. is that's actually when all the CEOs work out. Anyone who's in the gym that early in the morning is usually someone with a lot of self-discipline, a lot of drive, and a very busy schedule. Because, as the day progresses, you lose control of it. So you want to get done your things early in the day, because as the day progresses, the phone calls come in, always these distractions come in, and then you'll never get to the gym. So it was a very social crowd and very helpful crowd. I even got some job interviews from those people that I met in the early morning hours. And then, the late mornings, I would spend job hunting. I would fill out a lot of resumes, go to interviews as needed, call up the employers, annoy them. Did you get my resume? You have to be a little bit annoying, especially here in Norway, to let them know you're interested in the job. And then the afternoons, I went to the school. And then in the late afternoons, I would, get those kids from the daycare center and, do a little bit of babysitting until the parents would come home. And then in the evenings, after my homework was done, they were giving a lot of homework for Norwegian, or I was doing extra, sometimes I would get nervous about my situation and I would just fill out some extra job applications. But generally I would, try to do some socializing every evening, go, hit the bars or clubs or something and hope to run into somebody that had a lead for a job. So I was trying to, get it on all aspects, website, gym, just hanging out in town. You just never know when those things come up. There's also these meetup groups I was going to that were related to IT, trying to, get some contacts in the companies. So these are all like little job hunting tips for Norway. But I finally got a job. It took me 3 months, 12 days, and 10 hours. And finally, I got the job. It was really cool. It was a really great feeling. And I'll talk more about the details of that in either a future podcast or just refer you to the book. I haven't really decided on that. But in total, I filled out 153 job applications, gave 5 job interviews, and got 2 offers. So it was quite harrowing. It was a very busy 3 months, 12 days, and 10 hours. And the reality of the job hunting and the reality of this experience is that what I did ventures on the fine line of being courageous versus being crazy. Being a crazy person who totally lost it. So the fact that I was successful made me courageous. But if I was unsuccessful and had to return home after spending a ton of money in 6 months of my life, I would have been deemed a nut job. So that's my story about how I got to Norway. After this harrowing tale, using all the skills I learned in the Navy and growing up American, being determined, being persistent, never give up, keep your enthusiasm. Now I get to my job in Norway. Working in Norway, that's a whole podcast by itself, and that will also be in the book. Basically, what I can tell you about having a job in a large Norwegian corporation is that it's fairly generic, it's very slow, and very political. People seem to get sick whenever the weather is good, and it's an awful good place to scam. You can read a lot of different newspapers from around the world. You can work on your blog. You can even run another business, if you're really clever. Even some people are running a mail order business using the company mailroom, just saying they're mailing, company promotional materials to other people or to other companies, but they're actually doing an eBay business, collecting the shipping, but not having to pay for it. So I've seen all kinds of crazy stuff since I've been here, in the company's situation. And this is because most of the companies have large state clients or even state ownership. They're owned by the government, so they really don't have to compete for their business. So it creates kind of another culture. This is very common in Norway, that the big companies all are like monopolies, basically, and don't have a sense of competition. We'll talk more about that sometime in the future. So there's this whole process of, quote unquote, becoming Norwegian. If you're an immigrant, you have to go through a process, and it's very different than the American one, extremely different. The Norwegian process is more of an indoctrination, and it's taught by some very liberal types. A lot of ladies with short hair and a lot of guys with beards and glasses and stuff like this who've studied, liberal stuff. None of them have really been out of their parents' house. So it seems. They teach you a lot of these social rules, through the Norwegian classes and also through the social studies classes that you take to qualify for this permanent visa in 3 years. There's a lot of rules, unwritten rules that are supposed to govern your nature as a human. It's looked down upon to talk to strangers, especially on the bus or in a shopping center. It's considered a big faux pas that you just don't talk to the person standing next to you. Even saying hello in passing is unusual. That was very strange for me because, going all the way back to my days at Kansas State University, during the orientation, the dean of engineering told us all that we must say hello in passing. It was customary and the nice thing to do. And when you walk on the campus of Kansas State University, everybody says hello. The cowboys, there's a lot of cowboys there from the farms, from the cattle ranches. They're dipping their hats like howdy. It's pretty cool. And it's a really, nice place in the middle of America. And in Norway, that's not, they are totally the opposite. So that was a big shock for me. On the surface, things here in Norway look very American, but, underneath the surface, they're very different. The people look like Americans. They look like people from Kansas or Minnesota. And, there's the cars and, the food. A lot of the food is very similar. But that's just on the surface. When you go below, you start realizing that there's some very big differences here. The American process, the American integration process is a journey of self-discovery. You're coming to a new country. You don't get anything. I think they give something to the refugees who come to the U.S., but generally immigrants who come to the U.S. don't get anything. So it requires a lot of personal initiative and a lot of will and a lot of making mistakes and learning as you go and finding your own niche and your own way. And you're constantly learning and changing. No one is giving you instructions, but here in Norway, they give you a lot of instructions. You definitely get the sense here in Norway that there's a state agenda to make sure everybody has a place and stays in it. Everyone has a job to do. It's like the Smurf Village or a Disney choreography, that everyone is a character and everyone has a kind of a job and a title, and you're not really expected to change from where you're at. Another topic here that you really pick up on coming from America to Norway is that there is a ton of envy and jealousy. I never even understood what that stuff was. I couldn't even fathom these words. In America, when you see someone that has something you want, you go get a second job, or you work harder at your current job, or you go start a business and you try to get that thing or car or house or vacation or whatever it is that you want that your neighbor has for yourself. You don't, you might even get in a competition with your neighbor. If he buys a Lexus, then you go out and buy a BMW and so on. But you go and work for it yourself. You don't down your neighbor for being successful. And here in Europe as a whole, people are very jealous of what other people have. And like I said, I really don't understand this word, but it's like they're angry the other people are doing well. That's my understanding of jealousy. Like I said, I never even heard these words until I moved out of the U.S. In Norway, it's quite common that, if you buy a new car or something, the neighbor will call the tax authority on you and get you in trouble, thinking that you stole it or, you're cheating on your taxes. So you have to be very careful here. You have to kind of conceal your wealth. So these Smurf-like people on the surface, it's like in that Jim Carrey movie, where he's living in the dome. I forgot what it was called, but it's a very famous movie that everyone is smiling, but deep down inside they're burning. The Truman Show. Yeah, it was called The Truman Show. Norwegian people are not impressed with outperformance. They're more threatened by it. If you're a high performer, a go-getter, it really scares the hell out of them. When I was working a job here, I was always getting lectured, on how to be more Norwegian. But it was so counterintuitive to how I was brought up in America and my experience at Kansas State, my experience in the Navy, my experience on Wall Street, which was to be a winner, be a go-getter, be persistent, be tough. Work is your way to redemption. And it's not like that here in Scandinavia, as you would think. Maybe in the old days it was. Now, here in Norway, what I said, it's hard to hide how well you're doing. All of your information is public. Life here is like having sex in front of a plate glass window. However much you try to cover up how well you're doing, there's these pages. One is called Gulsider and the other is called 1881. And I think even there's some government websites where people can look up how much money you made last year, how much net worth you reported. Every year you're supposed to report all your assets on your tax forms and report your income. And this information is public. Your neighbors can look this up and check up on you. So there's really no privacy here with regards to your wealth. I think these rules might have changed where you know when someone is looking you up. I'm not entirely sure. I've heard rumors that it can be done anonymously. Other people say that you have a right to know who's checking up on you. Generally speaking, a system like this fuels that jealousy and fuels that envy. You compound that with the fact that people here are spiritually crippled. They've been raised from an early age in these daycare centers where they've been indoctrinated to kind of shut up and stay in your place. It's only the top 1% of Norwegians, they grow up with nannies and they grow up with their mother and father, and they learn the American way of thinking, how to be an entrepreneur. But for most Norwegians, 98% of them grown up in these daycare centers, they have spiritually been crippled. They've been castrated mentally. So they're not able to have these emotional tools, these aspirational tools from within to break out of this. It's like domestication, I should say. And so this pent-up energy and this frustration translates into some very passive-aggressive and envious behaviors. And you have to live here to understand this. Like I said, you can hear all this praise about Norway in the mass media and stuff, but until you live here, you really won't understand it. So just be mindful that when you're living in a peaceful and well-balanced society, it comes at the price of your personal freedoms and very often your privacy. So yes, you get a lot of security here. Life is fairly routine, it's balanced, it's easy. There's a price to be paid. What's strange about Norway is that it's a country the size of Minnesota in terms of population, roughly like in the low 5 millions, 5.2 million people, something just like Minnesota. But Norway actually has a couple of official languages, which means that the state has to, provide support for these languages. One is called Sami, which is like a tribal language, like we have the Chippewa Indian language in Minnesota. They have even 11 Chippewa languages in Minnesota. And then there's Bokmål, which is a standard Norwegian. And then there's Nynorsk, which I'll get into a little bit more. And then there's another obscure language called Kven, or Ven, that's spoken by some tribe way up north. These are the 4 state-supported language. Nynorsk has kind of got a funny story, and I don't get Nynorsk, even why they did this. But there was this guy named Ivar Aasen. I call him Ivar the asshole. That's just my nickname for him. But he went around Norway combining dialects. Every Norwegian village had its own dialect, its own way of talking. It's just like, in America, we have a lot of dialects and regionalism. But, he went around the country collecting these dialects and combined them, taking bits and pieces from each and making an official language out of all these bits and pieces. It's kind of like a Frankenstein language. It's like Michael Moore going around the country combining Tennessee hillbilly with Chicago West Side jive and the Jersey Shore dialect, and then adding a bit of Compton Ebonics into the mix. And it creates one really screwed up language. And then they would, put this into a book and translate all the websites in this. So just imagine that, Tennessee hillbilly, Chicago jive, Jersey Shore, how you doing? Hi, what's up? Combined with some Ebonics from LA. Could you just imagine that all pressed into one language? And then, the governments would all have to have their websites translated into this, and there would have to be a certain amount of TV programming done in these languages, and people could get special accommodation if they don't know the official language. It creates a lot of overhead. This comes at taxpayer expense. This is money that could be better spent on other things. And so this is one area where you really come to see that as an American, we're a very pragmatic people in the way we think. We're aligned to the laws of nature and aligned to efficiency. Our culture is about doing things better, faster, cheaper. getting to a higher place. A lot of the culture in Europe is about preservation. You can't preserve everything, but apparently they want to try to preserve every little thing. I mean, in America, we still have the regionalisms, but we don't make them official. And it's charming, when I hear a Southern accent, and I enjoy listening to rap, which is spoken in jive or ebonics, but it's cool. They do it by themselves. The government's not in there kind of officializing it. So in a sense, America is the most natural society. We are ruled by nature. And we respect nature's laws. Instead of trying to overcome them, we let natural selection run its course, and then we go in one direction. And when you compare this to Minnesota, it's even more startling. Minnesota actually has more language diversity than Norway. As I said, there's 11 native Indian languages. Specifically, there's the Chippewa and Ojibwa tribes in Minnesota. Those are the two dominant ones. And then there was a lot of French settlement. So there's a fair amount of French Canadian in Minnesota. People have come from Canada and they were originally from France. And then there's a lot of Scandinavian languages, Swedish, Danish, Norwegian, still exists in some parts of Minnesota. And there's even accents, Minnesota dialects based on these languages, especially when you go up north. And we have Somali, and we have a lot of Latinos in Minnesota. But we don't combine all these into one new language that everyone must learn. Everyone just speaks English when it comes to doing governmental and official things, and it's their business what they speak when they're not dealing with the government. You have to ask yourself the question, why do we invent new languages just to make people happy? What it's doing is it's dividing people and keeping them out of economic opportunity. It's actually crippling them. It's disabling, when you have to support all of this gibberish. Let's just all speak English and Norwegian. Just English and bookmal should be the languages of Norway, in my opinion. English will help Norway, official English, when all the government sites are in English, will help them be more internationally aligned, and able to export more. Now that the oil is gone, Norway has to get into exports of manufactured goods and high-value goods. And the Swiss operate in English as well, and Switzerland is a good model. As I want to say, in short, having multiple languages is a serious misappropriation of resources. The money could be better spent on technical education or stimulating new industries. There's a 50-hour requirement that you have to take when you come to Norway to learn the history and the traditions and the customs and the laws. It's a 2-week course. It's actually 7.5 hours a day because an hour in these classes is actually 45 minutes. And they just kind of back-to-back this. And it's an intensive 2-week course by if you live in Oslo, the city of Oslo offers these courses. So I think throughout Norway, these are offered by the what they call communes. The local governments will offer these courses throughout the year for immigrants. And what I found very strange in these courses is that they very much overlook the Viking history. And, I've said it, I think, in a previous podcast, that that's what I want to integrate to. I want to be a Viking, and then they focus on this 1850s romantic nationalistic culture, when Norway was like in a famine and everyone was just wearing these bunads and, eating potatoes. I mean, that's so boring. The Vikings were what I wanted to study. So I had to learn a lot about this 1850s stuff, which I actually already knew a lot about. But it's not interesting. It's about as interesting as watching paint dry. The Vikings, you can read about Vikings and, for days. You'll miss meals, you'll miss sleep. It's so interesting to read about them. But the class had kind of an interesting twist. I was in the classroom with Somalis and Pakistanis and all these other people, and they had a section of the class explaining to all of us that it's against the law to beat your wife and castrate your daughters. And the Somalis in the class were actually very shocked. They're like, oh, they're my property. I can do what I want. And I was like, oh boy, there's a culture clash. And then one of the Pakistani guys in my class kept asking if he could have a second wife. And the teacher basically told him, you can have one official wife in Norway and you can do whatever you want outside Norway. So if you want another couple wives in Pakistan, that's fine, but don't let the Norwegian government find out. That's the liberal teachers for you. They should have just told him it's wrong. And if he doesn't like the Western culture, then he should go back to Pakistan. But no, they try to accommodate him and be politically correct and all this stuff. The people who actually have the most success in Norway, who I have found, are actually, ironically, people who've had prior military service. There's a couple of former Marines that I've met and former Army guys that have married Norwegian girls and settled here. They recognize the structure. the structured society. And they even recognize that it's an indoctrination, just like, you have in your boot camp or officer candidate schools, that it's a regimentation. They're able to actually even game it and take advantage of it because they see it for what it is, and they don't get infected by it. They just play the game and go along with it, looking for the loopholes. That's actually, I think, how you should approach this. Otherwise, you'll just frustrate yourself because you'll say, this is so crazy. So just try to learn this to have it to your advantage, and then you can game the system pretty good. You have to realize that no matter how well you speak Norwegian and how hard you try to fit in, you just won't make everyone happy. Someone here, especially in Norway, they like to complain a lot. They'll find something you did wrong or something that's missing. Like even if you're a blonde-haired, blue-eyed American doing everything perfectly, they'll somehow find something to say that you're not really Norwegian. Now, it's going to be impossible for me to get that recognition as a Norwegian, even if I speak the language and pay the taxes because of the way I look. But I'm fine. I'm an American, so, we can't beat that anyway. So just realize you can't make anyone happy. Just learn what you need to learn and prosper. And who cares what people think? You'll find your friends. Norway is pretty diverse, actually. There's a lot of foreigners, and there's always somebody you'll get along with. And just concentrate on those people and all the people that are like trying to down you. We have a lot of these people here in Oslo. There's the east side and the west side. And a lot of the people on the east side of Oslo are like these people who are always like negative and always want to bring someone down and always trying to find something wrong with you. So just stay away from those folks. Okay, so wrapping this up, just in short, just think of Norway as like a time machine for progressives, stepping 20 years into the future as if Hillary Clinton had won. You can see that it's possible for a society to kill the human spirit and neuter the population. Here, there's a high trust in Norway for the media and the government, and they're taking advantage. I just wanted this as a closing thought that having safety and living in a very nice society like this comes at a cost of your personal freedom. People are burying a lot of their emotions here, which rears itself in some pretty ugly ways. All of these things that are negative about Norway from an American's perspective is actually your advantage. With respect to the stupid stuff, just do exactly the opposite of what people tell you, and you'll have real friends, and you'll find financial success. You'll be taking opportunities that others are unable to do so because they have mental blocks in their head from years of indoctrination. They'll always tell you, oh, we can't do that in Norway. I'm a Norwegian. I can't do that. But you can. And you can even get rich doing it. You can take the leadership role. You can take the dirty jobs, and you can move ahead because they won't. And that's actually even easier here to succeed in many ways than it is back in the U.S. Because in the U.S., everyone's got to hustle, and nothing is beneath anybody in the U.S. I mean, I know Harvard guys that, started beverage businesses, and they were driving the trucks and delivering the beverages themselves and even fixing the engines. But here in Norway, it's not like that. A lot of people are kind of too prissy to get their hands dirty. So just be yourself. Deep down, they love it. And remember, as an American, you have a creative advantage. I mean, it's quite evident in our movies and our music. The whole world consumes our creativity. Everyone's trying to replicate it, but these things happen from childhood, when you're raised with a lot of fairy tales and dreams and your parents telling you that you can do anything you want to do. They weren't raised like that. They were raised very differently. So just remember, if you were raised to be a dreamer, you're going to really win here. The socialists were all raised to be followers, to comply with the system, and they're taught that in a daycare center, and then their parents reinforce it at home. So use that to your advantage. I'd like to say I'm here to stay in Norway. Loving America from afar is a very great thing. And it's helping me educate all these, snowflakes and millennials who think that there's a better place. If you want to come to Norway, I would join the Navy or Army or Marines first and, learn how to live in a regimented society and have some drive and ambition before you even think about stepping foot here. A lot of these dreamer types, these social justice warrior dreamer types, they don't have the tools, the discipline to succeed here. They get swept up in all of this jantelagen, they call it, or janteloven. I think jantelagen is a Swedish word. They get swept up on it. They can't recognize it. And then they end up not getting jobs and having to return home. But those who have had the military training and actually a conservative viewpoint actually turn out to be more successful. In the future episodes, I'll talk more about my life in Oslo and how I came to develop this podcast. in addition to the other political and economic topics I discuss. But I can briefly tell you that life in Oslo is pretty good, and it's what you make of it. Now, in closing the show, I would like once again to thank all the donors. And we hope to see more of you in the future. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe on iTunes and follow us on social media.